Gia. Or should I say, El Gecko? Picked up on our way back from a sale, the backpack full of cash. Bet your boss, the spider, wouldn't be too pleased if you didn't show up with that at your meet and greet this afternoon.
I want a lawyer.
You don't need one. You're not arrested. Not yet. Because if we did, you'd be dead as disco before sundown. I bet the spider wouldn't be too pleased if he found out his best delivery girl was talking to the cops.
You're not a cop.
That's right. Detective, actually.
You're neither. Your reputation precedes you, Detective Gracie, like the stink of shit 10 feet back from the pile.
Oh, yeah? And what would a drug-dealing, gun-smuggling piece of shit like you know about a decorated detective like me? You didn't get on this side of the table by accident. Let me tell you something.
Of interrogation scene that, when read through a queer and emotionally grounded lens, becomes a complex meditation on power, self-mythology, institutional loyalty, and the uneasy intimacy that can arise when two women are forced into prolonged emotional proximity within a structure designed to strip context and humanity away. And while the surface language of the scene is harsh and confrontational, the deeper narrative energy is driven not by threats or dominance, but by recognition, disavowal, and the painful effort to sustain a coherent sense of self in a system that demands constant performance. Gracie enters the scene clinging tightly to an identity she has clearly rehearsed for years, that of the righteous enforcer, the necessary hard figure who believes that moral clarity can be achieved through forceful certainty. And this self-concept is not simply professional but deeply personal, functioning as a protective armor that allows her to move through a world that has likely questioned her authority, legitimacy, and belonging at every step. For many women, and particularly queer women, occupying such a role requires overcompensation, an exaggerated certainty that leaves little room for doubt, tenderness, or vulnerability, because those qualities are often read as weaknesses rather than strengths. Gia, on the other hand, is positioned as the ostensible outsider, the one whose moral standing is immediately dismissed, yet she demonstrates a striking emotional steadiness that contrasts sharply with Gracie's volatility, suggesting a woman who has learned to survive not by claiming righteousness, but by understanding the systems that attempt to define her. This dynamic resonates powerfully with lesbian audiences who recognize the experience of being misread, surveilled, or prematurely categorized, and who develop a keen awareness of how power operates beneath language and posture. The interrogation becomes less about extracting information and more about the desperate maintenance of hierarchy, with Gracie insisting again and again on her role as the hero, as though repeating it might finally make it incontrovertible, while Gia's refusal to crumble under this insistence destabilizes that narrative without ever directly attacking it. This is where the scene's emotional intimacy quietly takes root, not through softness or confession, but through sustained attention, through the intensity of being seen and challenged by another woman who refuses to accept the assigned script. In many cultures, particularly those uneasy with women loving women, such intensity is permitted only under adversarial or professional guises, allowing admiration, fixation, and fascination to masquerade as hostility or rivalry. And the film carefully exploits this social loophole to explore how deeply women can become entangled with one another, even when affection is unspeakable. Gracie's fixation on Gia's alleged moral failings mirrors her own fear of moral collapse, suggesting that what she is truly interrogating is the fragility of her self-concept, while Gia's calm engagement reflects an understanding that the most dangerous lies are the ones institutions tell their most loyal servants. As the power dynamic shifts and the truth of Gia's role is revealed, the scene reframes itself as a study in exposure rather than defeat, emphasizing the quiet devastation that comes when a woman realizes that her identity has been shaped by violence she has been taught to justify. This realization is particularly resonant for queer women who have navigated professions or families that demanded silence, compliance, or complicity in exchange for conditional acceptance, and who know the grief of recognizing how much of themselves they have given up in order to belong. The film refuses to frame this moment as catharsis or moral victory, instead lingering on the emotional disorientation that follows the collapse of certainty, insisting that reckoning is not a spectacle but a slow, internal process marked by shame, confusion, and reluctant self-awareness. The language of heroism and villainy that dominates the early exchange is gradually revealed as inadequate, a simplistic framework that cannot contain the complexity of women's lived experiences or the ethical ambiguities of survival within oppressive systems. This critique extends beyond the characters themselves to address a broader cultural discomfort with women who occupy positions of authority or defiance, particularly when those women do not conform to expectations of warmth, softness, or moral purity. For lesbian viewers, the scene underscores how easily women's anger is weaponized against them, either to justify punishment or to strip them of credibility, while also acknowledging how anger can become a refuge when tenderness feels too dangerous to access. The invocation of April Fools near the scene's conclusion functions as a destabilizing refrain, mocking the seriousness with which these roles have been performed, and hinting at the arbitrariness of the narratives that govern who is believed, protected, or condemned, a theme that echoes queer life in a society where legitimacy is often contingent and revocable. Rather than offering resolution, the scene leaves viewers with a lingering sense of unease and recognition, inviting reflection on how often women are forced into false binaries that obscure their emotional truths. In this way, the film resists both erasure and sensationalization of lesbian experience, choosing instead to depict women's interactions as ethically complex, emotionally charged, and deeply human, without resorting to spectacle or transgression. The relationship between Gracie and Gia, though brief and bounded by hostility, mirrors real-life dynamics within queer communities where mentorship, rivalry, attraction, and mistrust can coexist, shaped by power imbalances and the ever-present need for self-protection. The scene acknowledges how queer women often learn to communicate desire, admiration, or curiosity through coded forms, using confrontation, sarcasm, or intellectual sparring as safer conduits for connection in environments that punish overt vulnerability. At the same time, it speaks to women more broadly by illustrating how institutional conditioning teaches individuals to prioritize duty, control, and outward competence over emotional honesty, resulting in burnout, moral injury, and a profound sense of alienation from one's own values. By grounding its drama in dialogue and psychological tension rather than physical spectacle, the film insists on the seriousness of women's inner lives and the cultural importance of taking their ethical struggles seriously. This approach challenges a media landscape that too often reduces women-centered stories to moral lessons or sensational thrills, instead offering a narrative that trusts viewers, particularly women and LGBTQ+ audiences, to engage with ambiguity, discomfort, and unresolved emotion. Ultimately, this first scene establishes the anthology's thematic foundation by asserting that crime in this context is less about lawbreaking than about the quiet violences of self-betrayal and enforced roles, and that the most consequential confrontations are those that force women to see themselves clearly, perhaps for the first time. It positions lesbian and queer women not as symbols or provocations, but as full subjects whose desires, fears, and ethical dilemmas deserve careful attention. And it affirms that visibility is not achieved through shock or defiance alone, but through the painstaking articulation of emotional truth in a world that remains deeply uneasy with women who refuse to simplify themselves or their relationships.